She turned to address the full room. I'm proposing we form a transition committee to oversee new board elections within 60 days. I'm also suggesting we hire a professional management company to handle violations fairly and consistently. You can't just, Harold started. Actually, we can. Karen smiled, pulling out one final document. I had an attorney review our HOA charter. Did you know that any board member can be removed by a simple majority vote of residents? And that emergency elections can be called with a petition signed by 30% of homeowners? She held up a thick stack of paper. I have signatures from 68% of residents calling for your removal, Harold, and new elections. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. Harold stared at the petition, his authority crumbling in real time. There's something else, Karen continued, her voice softer now, but no less determined. I found the original developer agreements from when this neighborhood was built. Turns out, half the rules Harold's been enforcing, they were never legally enacted. They were just suggestions he decided to make mandatory. Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. This is ridiculous. You people don't understand the complexity of running a community, the liability issues, the property values. We understand perfectly, interrupted Mr. Patel from Elm Drive. We understand that you've been on a power trip for 2 years, and we're done with it. As the formal vote was called and Harold was removed from the board by an overwhelming margin, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. But as she shook hands with neighbors and accepted congratulations, she noticed Harold slipping out the back door, his face dark with something that looked like more than just wounded pride. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? This isn't over. Some rocks are bigger than others. Karen stared at the message, a chill running down her spine despite the warm community center air. She'd won the battle, but something told her the war was just beginning, and Harold Pemberton didn't seem like the type of man who accepted defeat gracefully. Outside, she could swear she heard the sound of a truck engine rumbling to life in the parking lot. But when she looked through the window, all she saw were the familiar streetlights of pristine Grove Boulevard, casting long shadows across the empty asphalt. Karen Whitfield's pristine white BMW lurched to a stop as the 220-pound decorative boulder she just launched from her second-story window crashed through her neighbor's fence, obliterating 3 prize-winning rose bushes and landing squarely on top of a ceramic garden gnome. The gnome's pointed hat stuck out from beneath the rock like a tiny gravestone. Karen, bellowed Harold Pemberton, HOA president and professional thorn in her side, as he burst through his back gate. What in the Sam Hill? That's Dulcetor Whitfield to you, Harold, Karen snapped, marching down her driveway in fuzzy slippers and a bathrobe that had seen better decades. Her silver hair, usually helmet perfect, stuck out at odd angles. And that boulder was a hazard. I was removing a safety concern. Harold's face turned the color of his demolished roses. A safety concern? That rock has been in your front yard for 15 years. Exactly. 15 years of potential liability. Karen crossed her arms, her law degree from 30 years ago suddenly feeling very relevant again. Besides, your precious HOA covenant clearly states that all landscaping modifications require approval. Did anyone approve my rock? You can't just. Harold sputtered, gesturing wildly at the destruction. There are procedures, forms, the Architectural Review Committee. The absurdity hit Karen like a lightning bolt, and for the first time in months she laughed, really laughed. It started as a chuckle, but grew into something wild and liberating that echoed off the Minxie mansions lining pristine Grove Boulevard. 3 neighbors emerged from their houses, smartphones already recording. You know what, Harold? You're absolutely right. There are procedures. Karen's eyes gleamed with the dangerous light of someone who'd finally found her hill to die on. Funny thing about procedures, though, they cut both ways. She pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. Harold watched with growing alarm as she posted photos to the neighborhood Facebook group. HOA President's illegal shed construction. Day 47 without permits. The comments started flooding in immediately. What shed? Harold's voice cracked. The one behind your garage, genius. The one you've been temporarily storing your classic car in since March. According to county records, no permits were filed. According to HOA bylaws section 4.27, any structure over 120 square feet requires unanimous board approval. Harold's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. Karen felt a surge of power she hadn't experienced since her days as a corporate attorney, before the layoffs, before the divorce, before she'd become just another bitter middle-aged woman in suburbia. Here's what's going to happen, Karen continued, her voice gaining the commanding tone that once intimidated opposing counsel. You're going to withdraw that ridiculous citation of my lawn gnomes being too whimsical for neighborhood standards. You're going to personally reimburse me for the tree removal fee you claimed was necessary for sightline safety. And you're going to stop treating this HOA like your personal fiefdom. Or what? Harold challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. Karen smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant sight. Or I'll show up to next week's board meeting with every violation I've documented in the past 6 months, including photos of the Hendersons' unpermitted deck extension, the Johnsons' illegal chicken coop, and your wife's garden shed. That's exactly 121 square feet. The color drained from Harold's face as the implication sank in. Karen had always been thorough. It was what made her a good lawyer and, apparently, a formidable enemy. Harold sat at the head table, flanked by the remaining board members who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd grew. The air crackled with tension and the scent of burned coffee from the ancient machine in the corner. Before we begin tonight's regularly scheduled meeting, Harold announced, his voice slightly hoarse, I want to address the recent disruptions in our community. The board has taken unprecedented steps. Point of order. Karen stood, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. According to Robert's Rules of Order, which this HOA claims to follow, residents have the right to address grievances before any new business is conducted. Harold's jaw tightened. Mrs. Whitfield, you are not recognized to speak. Actually, Harold, I am. Karen opened her briefcase with deliberate precision. According to the HOA bylaws, section 12.4, any resident facing disciplinary action has the right to present their case before the community. Since he threatened a lien against my property, I believe that qualifies. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Karen noticed several residents nodding, their phones out and recording. Social media had amplified her fight far beyond pristine Grove Boulevard. Furthermore, Karen continued, pulling out a thick folder. I've discovered some fascinating inconsistencies in how these rules have been enforced. For instance, that architectural review committee that approved the Hendersons' deck extension, it only had one member present. According to our covenant, all modifications require review by at least 3 board members. Harold's face went pale. That was an oversight, was it? Because I have documentation of 17 instances where rules were selectively enforced over the past 2 years, always against the same demographic of residents. Interestingly enough, Karen's voice grew stronger with each word. Single women, elderly residents, and families with children seem to face citations at a rate 3 times higher than married couples without kids. Mrs. Patterson, the 73-year-old widow from Maple Street, stood up. She's right. Harold cited me for excessive bird feeding, but the Johnsons have been running an actual rooster next door for months. My daughter's chalk art was called property defacement, added Jennifer Walsh, but somehow Brad Morrison's motorcycle repair hobby that goes until midnight is perfectly fine. The room erupted in supporting voices, years of suppressed frustration finally finding an outlet. Harold banged his gavel frantically, but the crowd had found its voice. Karen raised her hand, and remarkably, the room quieted. I'm not here to destroy this community. I've lived here for 8 years, and I love my neighbors. What I can't tolerate is the abuse of power, the selective enforcement, and the bullying that's been masquerading as leadership. By Tuesday morning, Karen had transformed her dining room into a war room. Legal pads covered the mahogany table she'd fought for in the divorce, each filled with meticulous notes about property violations, procedural infractions, and what she'd begun calling Harold's reign of terror. The grandfather clocked ex-husband had abandoned chime 7 times as she reviewed her strategy over black coffee and determination. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:15 a.m. Mrs. Whitfield? The young man on her doorstep wore a crisp uniform and carried an official clipboard. I'm here about the noise complaint. Karen's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Let me guess. Harold called about my disruptive gardening activities yesterday. The code enforcement officer looked uncomfortable. We received reports of property damage and public disturbance. There's also mention of projectiles being launched. Officer. Karen squinted at his badge. Martinez. Would you like to see the documentation I have regarding 17 separate HOA violations currently being ignored by our illustrious president, including the unpermitted structure he's using to house his 1987 Corvette? 20 minutes later, Officer Martinez left with a stack of photocopies and a bemused expression. Karen watched from her window as he knocked on Harold's door, then walked around to photograph the shed in question. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harold. You've crossed a line, Karen. This means war. Perfect, she muttered, forwarding the message to her daughter Sarah, a family law attorney in Seattle. Threats in writing. Amateur. Sarah called within minutes. Mom, what the hell is going on? Your texts sound unhinged. I'm finally fighting back, sweetheart. 30 years of letting people walk all over me ends now. By throwing rocks at neighbors? By using the same tactics they've been using against me. Did I tell you Harold cited me for excessive Christmas lighting in February? For a single string of icicle lights I forgot to take down? Sarah sighed. Mom, you can't just declare war on your entire neighborhood. Watch me. Karen hung up and returned to her research. By afternoon, she'd submitted 14 formal complaints to the city, ranging from unpermitted modifications to potential fire code violations. Her masterpiece was a 47-page document titled Systematic Abuse of Power, a Pattern of Discriminatory Enforcement in the Pristine Grove HOA, complete with photographs, timestamps, and legal precedents. The neighborhood WhatsApp group exploded with activity. Half the residents were panicking about potential fines, while the other half were sharing their own stories of Harold's petty tyranny. Karen had inadvertently started a revolution. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down knocked on her door at sunset. Karen, dear, I wanted to thank you. Harold made me remove my butterfly garden last month, said it was encouraging pests. But the Smiths have that awful above-ground pool that actually violates 3 different rules. Document everything, Karen advised, handing her a fresh legal pad. Photos, dates, witnesses. We're building a case. By Thursday, Karen had 5 allies and a growing collection of evidence. Harold, meanwhile, had tripled his patrol schedule, armed with a measuring tape and what appeared to be a genuine vendetta. The showdown came Friday afternoon. Karen was photographing the distance between the Morrisons' fence and their property line, potential encroachment, violation 23B, when Harold appeared, flanked by 2 board members. This ends now, Karen. The emergency board meeting last night was unanimous. You're in violation of the Community Standards Clause for behaviors detrimental to neighborhood harmony. You have 30 days to modify your conduct or face a lien on your property. Karen straightened, feeling every one of her 57 years in her spine, then smiled the smile that used to make corporate executives sweat. Harold, did you just threaten to put a lien on my house for? What exactly? Exercising my rights as a homeowner, reporting legitimate violations. For being a troublemaker, Harold snapped. Perfect. Thank you for saying that in front of witnesses. Karen pulled out her phone and stopped the voice recording app, because putting a lien on someone's property for reporting HOA violations is called retaliation, and it's very, very illegal. Part 3. The Reckoning. The community center had never hosted a more packed HOA meeting. Every folding chair was occupied, with overflow residents lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. Karen arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase that had gathered dust since her layoff but still commanded respect.